Bueno, pues seguimos, damos paso ahora a la siguiente intervención, que también es online. Esta era en Venecia, ahora nos vamos a Florida. Bueno, Pat Villeneuve es nuestra ponente. Ella es profesora y directora de Administración de las Artes en el Departamento de Educación Artística de la Universidad Estatal de Florida. Pat nos parecía, pues a las personas que hemos configurado el programa, Rosa, Carmen, Irene y yo, un lugar muy interesante para continuar con esta, con esta parte, ¿no?, en la que hablamos de curaduría y educación. Ella habla de la evolución de la educuradoría. Pat, además de esta función que os menciono en la Universidad de Florida, es editora. Tenéis un resumen de su currículum, de su extenso currículum, y me parece interesante, por ejemplo, que en 2009 recibió el premio a la Educadora Nacional de Museos del Año de la Asociación Nacional de Educación Artística de Estados Unidos. Igualmente ha hecho publicaciones, proyectos de investigación, etcétera, y no me resisto, por afinidad, a comentar su última línea de currículum que me encanta. Es artista visual y actualmente una de sus colchas deconstruidas, de su patchwork, está expuesta en el National Quilt Museum, el Museo Nacional de la Colcha. Pues, Pat.
Yes.
Hello.
Good morning here. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm very happy to have an opportunity to speak with you today, although it would have been lovely to be with you in person. Let me tell you what you can expect from my presentation, and I will be watching the time very carefully. I want to begin by setting the stage by giving you the background that informed educuration. And then I want to talk about why we moved on from educuration to our new dimensions of curation exhibition model. A long time ago, when I entered the field, it was a field that was very hierarchical, it was divisionalized, and it prioritized curation. Education at the time was very much an afterthought, and honestly, in many places, still is. At the first museum where I worked, education did not have any say in the exhibitions that were coming up. In addition, we weren't even allowed access to the installations to see the exhibition. We did not see the exhibition until opening on Saturday evening, and Monday morning we had to train 150 volunteers to be tour guides. Even then, I thought education had more to offer. Even then, I thought that education needed a place at the table to inform the curation process, to make a greater contribution to the museum and to the community. And I've always had a vision of museums as living at the hearts of their communities rather than apart from their communities. My first pivotal moment came again years ago when I happened to be in Paris for New Year's Eve. And I was there with two colleagues who were also museum educators. On New Year's Day, it was cold. We were in a cheap hotel. So we were out looking for a restaurant that was open or any place to go and get warm. And we spent most of the day really roaming throughout the city. And that evening, by accident, we ended up in the neighborhood of the Pompidou Center and were surprised to see it open. And we went inside and we were just astonished at what we saw inside. The lobby was full. It seemed everybody in Paris was there that evening. There were families having picnics. There were people reading. It was a very casual atmosphere. There was a man doing Tai Chi. And my colleagues and I, we looked at each other and we said, this is the way it should be. People are gathering at the museum. They want to be here. They're very happy and comfortable. And that became my vision for how I wanted museums to become when I returned to the United States. I was already in graduate school at the time. I was pursuing a master's. and I went on to get a PhD. I engaged in professional activities. I went to conferences, I made presentations, I published journal articles. Once I had my PhD, I started graduate programs in museum education, first at the University of Kansas, and then I moved on to Florida State University, where we now have graduate programs, both master's and doctorate, in educuration. But despite a great deal of effort on my part, and also the parts of others, we just didn't see much advancement in the position of museum education in the museum. I had a second pivotal moment in 2007 when I was editing my book, From Periphery to Center, Art Museum Education in the 21st Century. It came in an article by Glenn Williamson. Glenn was an art historian, he was a curator, and at the time, he was director of the Museum Studies program at a major university. And he wrote an article entitled, a chapter entitled, The Emerging Role of the Educator in the Art Museum. And he said something that struck me. He recognized that education had been aspiring to have a greater role in the museum. But what he said is, you know, we as curators, we're not going to give way. But if you have something you can offer us to improve exhibition making, we are willing to share with what you can contribute. So at that moment, I realized curation had been here, education had been here. I had been trying to do this, and it wasn't going to happen. As I said to my students, you know, curators have it good. They are in a position of value and prestige in the museum hierarchy. It's like they get up every day and eat ice cream. Why would they want to give up that position? So at that moment, I realized I can't do that, but it might be okay to do this. And that's when I reconceptualized the terms of the debate. And this led to what we currently call educuration. But first, I have a sidestep. I need to give you a little bit more background. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you. Okay, so these are some of the things that have
Estos son algunos de los elementos.
Can you see the PowerPoint? Okay. These are some of the things that have informed our work on educuration. The first is about museum roles and functions. On the left side of the screen, you see what are considered to be the traditional roles and functions of museums. Museums collect, they preserve and conserve, they study and they research, they exhibit, and they educate. In 1990, Peter van Mensch wrote about methodological museology when he reconceptualized these roles or functions. Preserve continues, and it presumes collection. Study continues, but the very big change that made a huge impact on me was his third role or function. He called it communicate. And for communicate, he conflated or he combined the exhibit and the education role for the betterment of the audience. So what this meant to me was that exhibitions and education could no longer exist separately, but they had to work together for the benefit of the audience, as I said. Okay, now, this is something that has very much informed my thinking, and I teach to all of my students. This is the universal to unique continuum offered by David Henry Feldman, who is a cognitive psychologist, and he reconceptualized the idea of development. On the left end of this continuum, you see universal development. These are the things that happen spontaneously to all people worldwide by grace being alive. For instance, all children, all babies who are born healthy, learn to walk plus or minus 1 year of age. Now, as we move right on the continuum, we are already in the non-universal domains, and these have fewer and fewer people achieving these accomplishments. At the cultural level, these accomplishments represent those types of achievements that a specific culture considers necessary for adults to have to function well in that society. So, for instance, in the United States, in Spain, reading would be examples of cultural achievements. However, in other cultures, there may be other things that are expected. In an island culture, it may be more important for adults to be able to sail and do navigation by the stars or something of the sort. Now, already we recognize that not everyone achieves these. For instance, there are people in the United States who are illiterate, who can't read or write, but they generally recognize it as a shortcoming. And they don't, they're not proud of it. Now, as we move right again on the continuum, we are now looking at achievements that go beyond expectations in a culture and require additional education, apprenticeship, something of the sort in order to achieve. Discipline-based in the Western world might be the equivalent of going to university, and idiosyncratic would be the equivalent of graduate school. On the right end of the continuum, we have unique accomplishments, and those are the breakthroughs, the first-time accomplishments, the work of the artist, the work of the genius. When something occurs at this end of the continuum and is recognized by society, it is supported and it's replicated. And as it's done again and again, it slowly moves to the left on the continuum. Okay. And then another very important influence has been Parsons' levels of aesthetic development. Michael Parsons described the different ways that people consider things to be works of art, or whether or not they're good works of art. And you see the list here. As I go through the stages, I'm going to read you a brief description of each stage, and then also a sample statement that somebody at that level might say. Favoritism is the entry-level stage. All children start here. Everyone starts here. Some adults are still here. But at this stage, the viewer responds with delight, strong attraction to preferred colors or subject matters. A sample statement somebody might make that would be a really good representation of the favoritism level is, I just love pink flowers, and look, there's a puppy in the painting. The next stage, beauty and realism, prioritizes subject matter that is beautiful and are representational. Somebody at this stage of level of aesthetic development might say, that's painted so good it looks just like a photograph. Level 3, expression, recognizes that artworks can evoke feelings. Someone at that level might say, I feel pain just looking at the woman's face. Level 4, style and form. This level sees artworks as part of an art world context. This is where your art history comes in. Someone using this level might say, it's a contemporary piece, but the artist has appropriated Cubist imagery. And at level 5, autonomy, someone here analyzes the artwork from various viewpoints and might say a feminist lens renders a different interpretation of the work. Okay, so there is some degree of correspondence here, and I really want to talk about that. If we rotate the levels of aesthetic development and try to look at the universal to unique continuum again, you can see favoritism is probably universal. It seems that everybody starts looking at and thinking about works of art based on things that attract their attention. And in the United States, at least, the cultural level is beauty and realism. in the United States, we as a society have not valued art enough to require that it's taught as part of the general curriculum in public education and K-12 education. So people in the United States, people anywhere actually, are represented by the cultural part of this continuum. And in the United States, as I said, the typical level of aesthetic development is beauty, realism, and skill. But the art world tries to operate as far to the right as possible on this continuum. That's where the artists want to make art. That's where the curators with their high levels of knowledge, that is where they are operating. Now, there is a great difference here between the cultural level and the right end of the continuum. I call this the gulf of misunderstanding. And for me, it provides a strong rationale for education and educuration, because it's simply not practical, it's not reasonable, it's not efficient to expect our public education systems to instill in members of the general public a curator's level of expertise about works of art. Okay, so this led to our development of educuration, because we realized that we needed to collaborate with curators and we needed to find a way to do that. And as scholars, our work and our program are very much based on theory. And the theory that we chose for educuration is feminist systems theory as articulated by Stevens. The purpose of educuration, as I've said, is to, if you will, level the playing field and provide a collaborative practice between curation and education. On the left, you see the characteristics of feminist systems theories, and I will give the interpreter just a couple of minutes to translate those for you. On the right, you see how we adapted these for our model of educuration. We are asking the curatorial process, the exhibition making process, to be inclusive and pluralistic. We want to include voices of the disenfranchised, and that certainly is general public, but there are also many disenfranchised voices inside the museum. We wish to enhance organizational culture in the museum because this is where we work. We want to advance appropriate methodologies to do research and produce exhibitions, and we wish to bring about social and systemic change. Now, although I'm very satisfied with this model, it still requires the collaboration or the willingness of the curator. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure why that happened. And now, okay. So, oh, another side step, I'm sorry. I should add that along the way, I've always been an advocate for visitor-centered exhibitions. And I realized at one point that it was not enough for me simply to say we should do visitor-centered exhibitions, because even if people were willing, they would come back with, well, okay, what does that look like? How do I do that? So I just wanted to make you aware that I had developed a model for visitor-centered exhibitions. It's called Supported Interpretation. And here are a couple of the citations so that you know that there is some work on it that exists. Okay, because we realized that educuration still relied very much on the goodwill of the curators, we realized we had to have a way to talk about exhibitions and exhibition making. So Ann Rowson Love, who is my most frequent collaborator, and I started working on Dimensions of Curation, which is a competing values exhibition model back in 2018. we developed, we tested, and it was published in 2023. And I want to talk to you about dimensions of curation. Okay, it's based on a competing values framework, as I said earlier. In 1981, Quinn and Rohrbaugh, who were organizational theorists, attempted to generate a model for organizational effectiveness. But as they looked at the literature, they immediately realized there were some dilemmas, some contradictions. For instance, some of the literature said an effective organization should look outward to its environment. Other literature said an effective organization needs to look inward. And they realized that either of these could be correct depending on the circumstances. And so they reconceptualized these dilemmas as competing values for their work. Now, what is a competing value? They're alternatives. They're frequently seen as opposites, neither of which is inherently right or wrong. The appropriate choice depends on the context. And I have an everyday life example here. Imagine a new parent deciding whether to stay home with the baby or go back to work full time. We frequently think of it as either or, and each option has benefits and challenges. But when we place them on either end of a continuum, it suggests they are not the only options, and there are a range of options in between. It's not only stay home with baby or work full time. It might be work part-time. It might be to take the baby to work. It might be asking the partner to take parental leave. So a little bit more about Quinn and Rohrbaugh. They reconceptualized, they changed their work. They could no longer do an overall theory of organizational effectiveness, but they came up with this competing values model. And their framework has two axes that bisect in the middle. So the x-axis represents organizational focus and ranges from people to organization. The y-axis reflects the form and organizational structure and power, from control to flexible. Because these axes bisect, they give us 4 quadrants, each of which describes a different type of organizational process. And you can see the names there. It's really not important to me that you know these. I just want you to know what was the basis for our work. And you'll see there's a very close correspondence between Quinn and Rohrbaugh and what we have developed. Okay, so in our adapted model of exhibition curation, the x-axis, instead of being organizational focus, is interpretive focus. And it ranges from the object to the audience, with the range in between. The y-axis is curatorial power, ranging from the lone creative, which is a term we use to describe the solitary curator who has had the power to work alone and make all the decisions, usually right up to installation, to a collaborative curatorial process. Now, this results in 4 quadrants as well, and each of them describes a different curatorial practice. In the lower left, we have an object interpretive focus, the lone creative curatorial power. It's called traditional power. This is very familiar to many. We have a singular curatorial expert selecting and interpreting objects for an exhibition on a particular topic, such as the Belgian avant-garde or Ming Dynasty costumes. In the upper left, we have an object interpretive focus, collaborative curatorial power for an exclusive practice. In this quadrant, the interpretive focus remains on the object, but the curatorial power enlarges slightly to select individuals who can bring additional expertise to the exhibition while safeguarding the curator's role. Think, for example, of an academic art museum welcoming a traveling exhibition on theater stage design from the Czech Republic. The museum's curator in charge might invite a faculty member from theater to supplement interpretation. Now we're going to move to the lower right quadrant. Here, There is an audience interpretive focus, lone creative curatorial power, and we call this a sympathetic practice. The lone creative curator remains in charge of curatorial decisions, but makes those on behalf of a presumed audience. An audience interpretive focus in no way diminishes the value of the objects. Instead, it increases their relevance to visitors. Although a sympathetic approach is well-intentioned, the extent to which the exhibition resonates depends on the curator's familiarity with the community. Imagine, for instance, the challenge of a solitary curator presenting an exhibition on migration in a community with a large immigration population. In the upper right quadrant, we have an audience interpretive focus, collaborative curatorial power for an inclusive practice. This practice shares curatorial power with educators and other museum staff, along with appropriate knowledge bearers from the community. Curators will always be essential for their content expertise, but additional voices at the table provide other types of important knowledge, such as cultural fluency or community memory. For example, a member from a local quilt guild joining the curatorial team for a textile exhibition could provide technical expertise or help the museum connect with local objects and audiences. Okay. Where does educuration reside here? Well, certainly to the right end of the X continuum, where there is an audience focus. However, I would argue that it more strongly resides in the inclusive quadrant because there is a collaborative curatorial process that can include members from the community. I was honestly quite satisfied with this model, and then Ann Rowson Love said to me, wait, we've missed something. We have to add a Z-axis to represent curatorial intent, or why curators curate. And this makes it a three-dimensional model, which was considerably more difficult to visualize in a graphic and label. So we have taken a different approach, and you'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, here's the Z continuum, curatorial intent. And I want to talk about it for a few minutes, and then I will give the interpreter some time to read the word lists. These terms come from the literature of arts administration, and they represent orientations to what we do and why we do it. Democratization of culture is a more traditional, historic approach, and it is very much about conveying sanctioned knowledge to the general public for their good. So it is very convergent on the knowledge that you should know about works of art. On the right, we have cultural democracy, which is a newer approach. This is an approach that recognizes that there are multiple points of view and multiple ways to look at objects. It's very grassroots, and it's divergent because it enables many different possibilities, not just the correct knowledge. And now if you would read the word list, please. Okay, I hope that was sufficient time. When we add the Z-axis, we get 8 different types of exhibitions that, and we found it easier to show this on a tree. So the X-axis is represented here, object to audience, then curatorial power breaks down here, and then curatorial intent. We had a great deal of difficulty labeling 8 different types of exhibitions. So we describe them as exhibitions that, and you see the options here: disseminate, discern, enrich, amplify, mediate, inspire, empower, and act. Now, I think it's worth asking again, where does educuration reside here? Well, as we work through it, I would say just like in the two-dimensional model, it's more with the audience interpretive focus. In terms of curatorial power, educuration will be stronger with the collaborative approaches. And in terms of curatorial intent, cultural democracy is more inclusive. The ideal educuration exhibition would be an exhibition that acts. Now, we want to say loud and clear that the model can be used in a couple of different ways. It can be used to determine and reflect on past exhibition practices. It also can be used as a roadmap to change future practices. Imagine you had an exhibition and you didn't get the public response you wanted. You could use this tree and you could determine what type of an exhibition was it. And then you might say, oh, it was focused on the object, and it was very much about the solitary curator trying to teach about it. And then say, maybe it would have worked better if we had had an audience interpretive focus. You can use it as a roadmap to change things. Now, I also want to say that any type of exhibition might be appropriate, depending on your circumstances and your objectives. Now, why is this important? I consider this to be very important because every decision made throughout the exhibition making process, whether we think about it or not, determines who will come to the exhibition and who might feel disenfranchised. Okay, I've tried very hard. I know it was fast, but I've tried very hard to leave some time for questions and comments. I thank you for your attention. And I wanted to let you know that I will be presenting at the International Conference for the Inclusive Museum in Vienna in September. If you're able to go, it would be wonderful to meet you there.
¿Alguien tiene preguntas? Questions?
Muchas gracias, Pat, por esta exposición. Yo quería hacer dos preguntas. La primera es que este modelo de 8 opciones que habéis creado, si se está utilizando o si se puede utilizar para la propia reflexión de la institución y saber dónde se encuentra y hacia dónde quiere ir. Y por otro lado, la segunda pregunta, ¿en qué medida la asunción del poder de la toma de decisiones en el equipo, en el museo, está presente en la basculación de una de las opciones u otra dentro de las 8 posibilidades que se establecen en este continuo que ha presentado? Muchas gracias.
Yes, yes. That's the intention of it. And in the book, we have multiple chapters describing exhibitions at different museums in China, Europe, and the United States that have used the model to give examples of what it could look like. Admittedly, it works better, it's easier if the director or if the curators are in favor. However, it is still possible, I think, to find ways to influence the process by asking questions, by working in perhaps an educational gallery, by working with a curator who is open-minded or perhaps has been tasked with curating an unpopular exhibition. We have known of places where the curation has been done in the community with schools, with universities. It is possible, and in our experience, the community and the museum do see the difference with different types of curatorial approaches.
Hola, buenas. A mí me gustaría saber cómo se establece un proceso de trabajo con la comunidad, es decir, con diferentes actores de la comunidad, ya sea una escuela, una asociación, un tercer sector, es decir, a quien se involucre para hacer una curatoría compartida, ¿no?
I would like to know how could we create a work process with different stakeholders in the communities, I mean, with different schools or any other actors in the communities in order to create an educatorship.
Yes, that is a really good question. And the honest answer is it takes time. One of my colleagues advises that you proceed at the speed of trust. You need to build relationships, certainly. It's an investment in the community. And if you are a longtime member of the community, I think it helps tremendously. But when looking at a possible future exhibition, I think it's worth asking, like, who in the community might complement this exhibition? Who might have some expertise? And we're not necessarily talking about the object expertise that a curator has, but there are other ways, there's cultural familiarity. There are just different ways to be knowledge bearers or knowledge holders in the community. And in our experience, people in general seem to be very happy to participate in some way in the exhibition making process. We're doing this right now in China, by the way, at Shandong.
I'm going to ask my question in English because it seems easier like that directly. I'm a little puzzled about the question of the community as being a kind of overall something. In fact, when you prepare an exhibition, I suppose you prepare it with one community. And then the question is, how do you share? Do you consider that you share this exhibition better with other communities? Or is it really a kind of exhibition that comes back to the community that has inspired it? So how do you do the more universal sharing?
I think it depends on the exhibition, of course. In the book, there's a wonderful example of an exhibition done at Museum M in Leuven, Belgium, called Boundless Hospitality. And they worked with immigrant communities to do an exhibition. And the co-curators decided that what they really wanted to address was the issue of hospitality. And each one picked an object from the exhibition that they resonated with to show, and then they wanted the approach to the exhibition, they wanted the installation to seem welcoming. And so they set up a gallery much more like a living room space so that people could come and feel comfortable. And yes, it does look like a different exhibition, but it wasn't just the immigrants or their families who came. A lot of people came, and the idea of how is one welcoming was broadly recognized.
¿Cuál sería la diferencia entre las curadurías pedagógicas y educuratoría? ¿Educuraduría?
Yeah. Well, what will be the difference between pedagogical curation or educuration?
Las curadurías pedagógicas pensadas principalmente en las que se desarrollaron o partieron en la Bienal de Mercosur.
The first of them being born, as sort of saying, at Mercosur.
Con Luis Kapnitzer y que en realidad por lo menos en Latinoamérica nunca se pudieron desarrollar y rápidamente se fueron hacia una vía de extinción.
And they were created at the beginning, or they started with Luis Kavinsky, but unfortunately we weren't able to develop them, and they became extinct, so of speaking.
Porque las instituciones no están a favor muchas veces de democratizar el poder.
because sometimes institutions are not in favor to democratize power.
I agree with you on the last part. And as I said earlier, it certainly helps if there is a strong voice in favor of education. I want to clarify, was the first part of the question, what is the difference between traditional curation and educuration? Or what was the alternative with educuration?
Lo que proponía Kapnitzer era que las áreas educativas generaran sus propias exposiciones, sus propios procesos curatoriales.
Kapnitzer proposed for the different education areas to propose their own processes throughout the way.
Y ese tipo de procesos, por lo menos en Latinoamérica, cuesta hasta el día de hoy muchísimo, y por eso hablaba de que están en vía de extinción.
And these kind of processes are very difficult to develop in Latin America currently, and therefore, and as I was saying, they are becoming extinct.
Porque
Yes,
cuesta
yes.
muchísimo
I
democratizar
have
el poder.
traveled in Latin America and visited many museums there, and I am aware of that. Even with a traditional exhibition, I think it is possible with educational intervention to make any exhibition more user-friendly. It depends, of course, on the abilities of the education team and to what extent they are allowed to present programs or other interventions.
Okay, thank you. And last question, I think.
Hi, which is the role of the communication department in your model, knowing that the education department and the communication department are very important?
I didn't hear the first part of the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, because I don't know if I said it properly. Which is the role of the communication departments of the museums in your model?
As we developed the model, we actually looked to the statements that the communications department were making about the exhibition, and we looked at those as being reflections of curatorial intent. But I think that the messaging that comes from the communications department can greatly impact who might be interested in coming to an exhibition or who might stay away. So it's a very important role. And I think it's one to be mindful of. I would also suggest to the the communications department, that in addition to getting content from the curatorial team, that it would also be worthwhile to get input from the education team.
Yes, I was wondering whether in your new way of approaching curation, I mean exhibition making, with more community involvement, did you find out some principles that could be, kind of reinserted inside the exhibition making in general? I mean, did it build a kind of new knowledge of what is good exhibition making? Because we don't have that much with the traditional exhibition making. We have few principles, in fact. So do you build more of these principles by this new, approach of community?
I think that's an excellent question. And if I could use one word to answer it, I would say relevance. Seek relevance. And yes, the art object is important, but what it means to your communities is important as well. And it's participants from the community who are best positioned to help us understand what those additional meanings might be. So also I would say that it's reasonable to work with a smaller group of people. Trying to have 4 to 6 people, for instance, having input on an exhibition might be reasonable. Trying to get input for 100 does not work. It is not reasonable. So I would say choose wisely and be prepared to listen to what they have to say.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for your time. Sorry for the technical problems. There must be some
Yes.
very people here.
I'm very sorry about that, and I know I rushed through things, but I wanted to be able to give you the information. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you. Bye bye, Pat. See you soon.
Ciao, ciao.
Bueno, a vosotros también, perdonad las incidencias. Hemos hecho algunos kilómetros arriba y abajo, pero bueno, se ha ido solucionando. Nos vemos, si os parece bien, a las 3:30 para seguir con Santiago Eraso y luego ya los grupos de trabajo. ¿Vale? Gracias.